Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 344 of the Board Game Barrage podcast. I am your host, Neelan, the Orange Tank, and with me, as always, is Mark, the Green Tank.
Hello. Are we going to do a joke here where Kellen is here, and we're going to do a...
Yeah,
Should
exactly.
we speed it up this time or slow it down?
Yes, or slow it down, but up and down, both.
Yeah.
So you have it back and forth. Kellen, get your audio fixed.
Yeah.
The
jokes write themselves.
Just run back the greatest hits.
Yeah,
the
exactly.
last couple of months. No, it is just Mark and I. Kellen is
in Vegas.
What was the phrase? Out on this. Galen's in Vegas, so he's
Vegas.
there. He's right. He's right there. He's practically around the corner from you.
Exactly. Not only could he, but
couldn't be bothered to show up for a record.
No. But yes, he is otherwise indisposed with work.
But that is okay. We are going to power through, just Mark and I.
We're going to power through.
We're going to be
talking about love, right, Neelan?
Exactly. That's
love
it.
Between one podcast host and another.
Yeah, exactly. So a little bit of a peek behind the curtain here. We had this idea to do an episode based on the games that got us into the hobby, like the things that kind of made us who we are. Until it's something that inevitably happens, we realized that we did that episode already. Right. Although it was, in our defense, 7 years ago, something like that, almost 7 years ago.
Did podcasting exist 7 years ago? It's mind-blowing.
We were like on the forefront of it. I think we might have invented it and not realized what we were onto at the time. If only we had known, trademarked it or something, patented it. But nevertheless, we decided that what we're going to do is we're going to sort of pivot that a little bit. So not necessarily the games that were formative for us, but games that we kind of like matured our love for the hobby. Games that sort of like were the second wave, things that kind of really progressed. And critically, actually, one of the things we want to sort of focus on is games that maybe we don't talk about so much anymore, at least not as much. Games that were once like very prominent in our gaming lives, but not as much. But anyway, that is a lot of rambling for the second half of the episode coming up later. Before we do that, we are going to be talking about Der Fliegende Holländer, which is my terrible German pronunciation for Mark's game. And then I'm going to be talking about, I've heard people say that I've been talking about too many Lord of the Rings games. So I'm going to do a game based on another beloved fantasy novel.
Thank goodness.
The Hobbit. That is The Hobbit there and back again. I'll be talking about that in a little bit. But Mark, tell me about Der Fliegende Holländer.
Yes. Okay. So thank you, Neelan, for setting the bar so high in using the correct pronunciation, which I will not be doing. But anyhow, thanks.
Probably not. At
least it sounds correct. You may not be correct, but if you can't actually do it, then you fake it till you make it, I guess, or something like that. Anyhow. Thanks to my friend Cameron, who has a penchant for and a collection of these older, especially German games, I got a chance to play, I'm going to say it, Der Fliegende Holländer. Probably I'll splice in Neelan's pronunciation there to make it sound better. But that translates, and as soon as I said this to Neelan in our pre-show discussion, he knew exactly what it translated into, which is The Flying Dutchman. Not that that's going to help you any, since this game never actually got an English translation from the original 1992-93 edition from Parker Games, although it did get a new edition in 2016, but that is a Japanese-only version, so if you're looking for The Flying Dutchman in English, you are out of luck. However, and more importantly, this game, again, which came out in 1992, came out 3 years before its designer would release a little game called Settlers of Catan. Ever heard of it, Neelan?
I'm familiar.
Yeah. Kind of a big deal. Anyway, that's right. This is a Klaus Tuber design. So along with the fact that I'd never heard of this game, the fact that Tuber was the designer of it had me really interested in trying Der Fliegende Holländer. So while it's got this nautical theme of the Flying Dutchman, which carries across the entire game, what the Flying Dutchman, and I'll keep calling it that to avoid frustrating German-speaking listeners from now on, what it really is a stock market game, sort of. But let me explain. So the way it works is you've got this board, which shows a bunch of different ships in different colors all over it, with a few islands in between. But the board predominantly has these like identical pictures of ships, but all in different colors, and they're all separated by lines which connect all of them. And then on it, to start the game, you're going to place this black ship piece, which is presumably the Flying Dutchman itself. Each player starts with some money, which is going to be victory points at the end of the game. A couple of these horseshoe-shaped bidding tokens, more about that later. 3 random, let's call them stock cards that match the ship colors on the board. So you're going to have 3 cards randomly assigned to you that match like the different colors that are on the board. And 3 Schmied and 3 contour cards. Now, I don't know what Schmied or contour translate into from the original German, but I don't think I really want to know, as I much prefer getting the chance to play a Schmied card. So I don't even want to know what Schmied is, but that's what you have. You have Schmied and contour. Are you going to tell me what Schmied means now, Neelan?
Schmied is not ringing any bells.
Okay, great. Perfect. That's exactly what I want.
Do you know what it means?
I do not. I have never looked it up. And
no, you have no idea.
Ignorance is bliss. Okay. It's a Schmied card. That's all I need to know. So the way it works is whoever's the first player is going to throw a couple dice. One die is a 10-digit die, and the other one is a single-digit die. So you might roll a 40 on one die and a 6 on the other die, for example. And then so in that round, the lucky number, and this starts every round, is 46, for example, in that example. So what do you do? So it's very simple. Starting with the first player and then going around the table, you can do one of just 3 things. So the first thing you can do, and this is like sort of like the most influential action of the game, is you're going to try to bid to control where the Flying Dutchman is going to go to next. That is like the sort of biggest action you can take. The way you do that is if you choose to take this bidding action, you are going to bid some of these horseshoe tokens, and you're going to bid some of them face down in front of you. And once you've gone around the table, everyone who's chosen this option of bidding to control the Flying Dutchman is going to flip their horseshoe tokens over. And whoever is closest to the number, that lucky number I mentioned earlier, without going over, so you have Price is Right rules for American listeners, gets to choose where the Flying Dutchman goes, gets to choose where to move it around. Why this is important, and much more interestingly, what happens if people tie during this bid, I'll talk about a little bit later. So when the Flying Dutchman is moved, you're moving in one space, and it can either move to, again, one of these colored ships that is all over the board. Again, most of the spaces you're going to move to are these colored ships. Or it can go to an island. If it goes to a colored space, everyone with a share or a stock card in that color must reveal that. And if you have one of those colors represented in your 3 stock cards, wherever that stock is in value, you have to pay that money to the bank. So, for example, if the ship is moved to a purple space, and you have a purple card in your hand, you have to reveal any purple cards in your hand. And let's say the purple value is at 8 at that point. For every purple card in your hand, you have to pay 8 ducats to the bank. And if you don't have the money to pay, you are eliminated from the game. So that is player elimination, which is, again, a bygone sort of mechanic for the most part. Thankfully, this didn't happen to us. It doesn't seem to happen very often, but it is something to consider, that if you don't have the money to pay, if you are holding a stock that gets hit by the Flying Dutchman, you are out of the game. Now, not only does that happen, not only do you have to pay, but in addition, whatever color gets landed on, in this case, for this example, purple, that stock value goes from wherever it started, wherever it was, it crashes now. It goes all the way down to, I can't remember if it's 1 or 0, but whatever the value, whatever the color is, crashes in value to the bottom. And then, after that happens, all stocks, all colors, go up in value by 1. So if you have a stock that avoids getting landed on for a while, let's say like red is never landed on, every time another color is landed on, that red will incrementally get pushed up 1 and 1 and 1, and it'll go up and up in value. So that's one thing. You can move the Flying Dutchman to a color. Most of the game is that. The other thing is, you can move the Flying Dutchman to an island, conversely, instead of one of these colored ships. If you do so, anyone involved in moving the ship to the island can now reveal any of the 3 shares that they have in their hand, and they get whatever the value of that share is, whatever the value of that color is, in money immediately to their hand. So if you landed on an island and you saw red was worth 8, you could reveal a red card and you'd get $8. Now, I say anyone involved in moving the ship. And this has to do with those ties I was talking about, because ties for bidding for control of the ship happen a lot in my experience. So again, you roll this lucky number. Everybody now knows, like, the lucky number in this case is 51 or whatever it is. And so when you're bidding, you can often land right on that number, which is the best bid, in other words. In that case, if there are multiple people who are tied for the best bid, everyone involved must agree unanimously to move the ship to a specific location. If they can't unanimously agree, then another round of this bidding occurs between the players involved. So in that case, not only do you lose your bidding tokens that you use for the initial bid, but now you are going to be investing more bidding tokens, and they are hard to come by. More about that later, but this is becomes now a very heavy investment. And so people generally want to avoid that. And then this is where you get some of that really fun negotiation that I love in games like this, where you're like, I'll give you $3 and she'll give you $2. if you agree to move the ship where we want to go. You get that sort of thing because people are incentivized to avoid another round of bidding and negotiate to unanimously move the Flying Dutchman ship. So that's one of the 3 actions you can do, is to place a bid to move the Flying Dutchman. Really quickly, the other 2 actions are either playing one of your Schmied cards or one of your Contour cards. Again, you only have 3 of each of these kinds of cards, and once you play one of them, they're out of the game. I forgot to mention this, but whenever one of these bidding phases that I just talked about ends, all the bidding tokens that have been used for that bidding phase get thrown in a pile face down. Now, if you have played a Schmied card, you and anybody else in that round who have played a Schmied card, you get to split those bidding tokens among yourselves. So this is a closed economy in terms of the bidding tokens, because these bidding tokens are only circulated among the players. No new ones will come out. So if you, for example, let's say you're last in turn order in a round, and it comes to your deciding what action you're going to do, and nobody has played a Schmied card, if you're the only person in a round to play a Schmied card, you get all the bidding tokens that are in that pile. If somebody else has played it, you split it between the 2 of you. If more people have played Schmied cards, you all split it amongst yourself. And so this is a really cool aspect of the game that I liked, where you're trying to maximize the leverage you have based on where you are in turn order. Like sometimes it's better to be early in turn order because you can sort of set a marker saying, okay, I'm playing a Schmied card right now. And so if you want to play a Schmied card, know that the power of your cards are lessened. But if you're playing later in turn order, you can sort of see the lay of the land and decide what you want to do. So that's action number 2. One is bidding for moving the Dutchman, which is, again, the main action. Second one is playing a Schmied card. Last one is playing one of your 3 Contour cards. And these allow you to draw 2 cards from a deck of these stock cards, these colored stock cards. And so you draw 2 cards and you look at them, you discard any 2 cards you have. And so playing these Contour cards are the only chance you have to try to change which stocks or shares or colors, whatever you want to call them, you're invested in. And you only ever have 3 of these opportunities to cycle through, and you only ever have 3 share cards. You're never ever going to get more of them. So playing these cards can be very powerful because they're your only opportunity to pivot in terms of what you're invested in. And so that's the Flying Dutchman. That's the game. At the end of any round, you pass the dice to the next player and they become the first player, and so on until the game ends. It's a game with very sharp edges and definitely not a game for everyone. And it's a game I think you'll want at least 4 people, but would probably do best at 5 or potentially with a full complement of 6, although I can't speak about that personally, but 5 seemed to be a pretty sweet spot to play this game. I personally very much enjoyed it. With so few shares that you could ever get your hands on, and how punishing it was when the Flying Dutchman did land on one of your colors, this is a game that has really stressful, weighty choices, but choices that are pretty clear. Like, this is, again, a great example of a game where the rules and the options that you have are pretty darn clear, and the game gets out of your way and you get the hang of it pretty much immediately, and you can spend your brain power not trying to figure out, wait, whether there's a rule for this. Like, you know the rules and you get right to like the interesting decision making. If the number of stock market games on the market is any indication, there are a ton of folks who like these kind of games, these stock market games. And if you're one of them, I would definitely see if you could get your hands on a copy of this. And they seem not to be super pricey. I think this game is something like $10 on the secondary market. Kind of gives me, in a way, remind me a little bit of QE, the economic game, okay, in terms of how like fresh it felt. Again, although this game came out, in 92, so, 30 years or whatever ago now, but also how simple it sort of is to understand. QE strikes me as economic game where like it is kind of wild in what it's proposing and how it's playing, but the rules aren't really that complicated and you sort of can get right into it. So yeah, I think if you're a fan of economic stock market games, or even looking for a party-ish game with people that like this kind of thing, because this game, again, is very easy to teach, very talky, very interactive, and is over in 60 minutes. So I think even we're working that party sort of vibe. I would suggest, it's again not going to be for everyone, but I suggest trying to get your hands on a copy of Der Fliegende Holländer by Klaus Teuber if you can.
I think that's a fun combination of things where it's like both not very, very heavy, is offering something that you tend to associate bidding stock games with something a lot heavier. Like you said, like something like QE is kind of the exception to that, but like this feels kind of not quite as light and frivolous as that is, but like a little bit of a step up, but still like not incredibly heavy. Like it feels like a good combination of things. That bidding system sounds really, really fun. Like I like the way that it could just devolve into the arguing.
I mean, it's like I can see a family. For some reason, I'm associating this with Kellen's family. I don't know why. This is probably not accurate, but because you mentioned how his dad likes a choir.
Exactly. Yeah. That was going to be the same. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Like if you have friends or family who are not necessarily board gamers, but like stock market-y sort of games, like obviously that type of group would probably not like a heavy stock market game or something that's very intricate. But if you like that, like even like a Pit, although Pit is much more simple, but something like that, if they like that light economic interactive game, I think you could teach them this, even though not a word of it is in English. It's really simple to teach and has a lot of those fun moments, a lot of like pleading, negotiation, trying to figure out what cards people have because they're only holding 3, so it's not like that involved or complicated. So yeah, it felt like a diamond in the rough. So one I would recommend.
Well, cool. Okay, I'm going to be talking about The Hobbit, There and Back Again. This is another board game based on Middle-earth. But this time, not Lord of the Rings. This one's based around the story of The Hobbit. And I quite mean literally the story because this is a scenario-based game where each setup for this is one of the many paths along the journey of The Hobbit. This is a competitive game. This is not a campaign game in any sort of sense. Like you could just jump from some scenario to scenario, or you could play them in order if you wanted to. A, this is a roll and write game. B, very cool, very fun, very accessible. You have these great chunky books, and each book you open the page to is like the new adventure that you're playing in that round, and it's just dry erase markers. C, Reiner Knizia. It's a very compelling combination of things, like lovely sort of chunky components, lovely, adorable theme, well represented art, and you've got that Reiner Knizia pedigree. So like, how does this all come together? What is the game? What is it all about? The basic gist of it is the most immediate pull I can think of, and this it's not exactly right, but it's a good entry point, is Railroad Inc., where is a roll and write game. You're going to roll a bunch of dice, and most of those dice, not all of them, but most of them represent paths that you can draw. And that might be, okay, this is 2 blocks right next to each other. One is a straight path, one is an L-shaped path. Or there might be 3 blocks adjacent to each other, but they're forming one giant L. Like there's a mix of combinations of these different paths represented on a die. And then in typical roll and write fashion, you'll just pick one of those dice on your turn. So, you roll for all 5 of them. One player picks one, another player picks one, until all the dice are gone. Okay. Like I said, the majority of those dice is for drawing these paths. So if you pick that die, you draw a path on your board. Now, the way that this actually works is quite fundamentally different from mission to mission. So let's talk about the first one, for example. You have a bunch of dwarfs scattered around your board. They're all trying to get to Bilbo's house. So whenever you pick up one of those path dice, you're just picking a dwarf to start drawing a path, or continue drawing their path until it connects up to Bilbo's house. The objective for this scenario is to get as many of those dwarves to Bilbo's house in order to get points for them. Better yet, if they're fed, then they get extra points for them. So how do they get fed? One of the other dice you could be drafting instead could be a die that has a bread symbol on it. Now, crucially, all these dice are actually different from one another. So a few of them are exclusively path dice. Some of them have some combination of bread on them. Some of them might have swords on them, which could also be something you're collecting for points at the end of the scenario. Some of them are Gandalf wizard hat dice, which generally give you sort of a mix of different special favors you can trade in. If you sort of start collecting those dice, you can turn them in later for different effects. And again, these vary from each scenario to scenario. And it's kind of with all of these things connecting that you start to see like a little bit of what feels to me like the Reiner Knizia magic, because all of that might sound very staid, very kind of been there, done that. That's a lot of roll and writing. I've basically just described a lot of different roll and writes, but then you start to see how like, all these things have trade-offs and how like, okay, do I feed my dwarves before they arrive and get points? If I don't have the bread as they arrive, then they don't get the points. The scoring on the bread is not exactly in a straight line. So it goes like 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you might want to deliberately not feed the lower scoring dwarves so you can feed the higher scoring dwarves if you think you're not going to be able to feed all the dwarves. In addition, there's a little race going on in the corners if you're trying to get Gandalf to your home before another player does. So there's a lot that you're kind of like competing with. Swords have this sort of cumulative scoring that could be too powerful if one person gets all of them. So there's a healthy dose of haste drafting in this, which I really, really love. There's a healthy dose of looking at the pool of dice, looking at someone else's board and being like, oh, this is too good for you, or I'm not going to let you get that sword because you have too many, or I know you desperately need bread, so I'm going to take the only bread in the pool before you can take it, which just feels great. It just adds an injection of something interesting and fresh to this, to a game that would otherwise be maybe a little bit dull. And on top of that, each of these scenarios, like I said, feels quite different from one another. Like the second one is kind of more a little bit of a race game where you're kind of like traveling along this huge path, weaving around corners. The first person to get to each new region gets a bunch of points. The first person to kill the trolls in that region gets points. So it's like, it's this balance between staying behind in a region to get stuff and moving forward ahead. So there's a fair bit going on that feels quite different while still utilizing the same shared mechanic. It reminds me a little bit of what Welcome to the Moon was trying to do, where you kind of, it's the same idea, right? You have this shared sort of system, a bunch of different missions in this kind of shared game, but that kind of, to me, didn't feel like it felt very cohesive. I kind of felt like each of the missions in Welcome to the Moon kind of felt like so disparate from each other that they were barely using the core mechanic in a weird way. This feels a lot more coherent, a lot kind of more like it's building off of the ideas from one game to the next. I don't want to oversell it, though. It's still very much a roll and write. Like you're going to know going in if this is a game for you based kind of on that description. It's not necessarily breaking the mold on doing something that's so incredible or so unique or so different that I'm going to be like, oh yeah, you have to have this. But if the combination of accessible, gorgeous production, roll and write resonates with you with a little bit of that Reiner Knizia design flair that's going to make it feel just a little bit more interesting, a little bit more engaging than your average game in this genre, I think you might find something to like in this. I think it's pretty neat. I do really love the presentation of it, and having only played like a few of the scenarios, I'm excited to get through the rest of them.
Yeah, when you said roll and write, immediately, and probably to no surprise to you or anybody listening, like I was thinking this was not going to be something I was interested in at all. However, the production is just really appealing. It is undoubtedly really appealing. And obviously you mix Reiner Knizia in and you sort of have my attention. Although I will say that when you said it was sort of like Railroad Ink, which is a game that I like, I'm not saying Railroad Ink is bad. I sort of was worried, and in looking at the dice, like that I'm sort of looking at pictures, the dice seem Railroad Inky. I'm like, oh, is this going to be too close to that? But it definitely does not seem to be, and I find myself interested in playing this for sure. Let me ask you, so there are a number of different like missions or chapters or whatever. Would you say like you would play one chapter in a session and that would be fine? Like how long does a chapter go, for example?
It's like 20 to 30 minutes per game. So like we played multiple in like one session. So we blew through, I actually don't know offhand how many chapters there are in total, but we blew through 4 in one session, for example. So like it was definitely that feeling of like moorishness, right? Of like playing one, it being short enough and then being like, oh, I want to see what the next one does. Right. And then you turn the page and you're like, oh, this looks interesting. And you're about to put it away, but then you're like, let's just do this one. It's exactly because none of the rules are complicated.
That's what
it takes you a few minutes just to read the rules for that section. In fact, you could just read the rules out loud once in a couple of minutes, and everyone knows what's happening. None of them are really that complicated in our experience so far. It's reminiscent to me of another Reiner Knizia game, My City, which it kind of just has that feeling of like, okay, you have a core to this. It doesn't have that kind of legacy component that game has, where every game is building on the previous one. But it's just got that feeling of like, man, I just want to keep picking at this. I just want to keep sort of seeing where this goes, like what he does with it, There's always just something interesting and novel he's doing with the system in the next game, which is just, it's a lovely thing to discover. I think the thing that I would say is probably like a potentially big caveat is I'm not sure I'm necessarily going to want to replay this once I play through all these chapters, but like at that point I would have had 8 half-hour games of this. I would have just treated it like a little mini campaign, and I feel like I would have got what I wanted out of it. So that's not even necessarily that big of a caveat for me. Like I would be very content to like play through this once.
Not every game needs to be or is even aiming to be like your favorite game of all time. Some games are just like real quick and you go through them and that's what they're offering. And absolutely. For what it's worth, again, I don't hate roll and write games, but they generally are not things I get excited about. But this does seem like something that even going in knowing that I'm sure it's not going to be my favorite game of all time or top 50, seems like fresh and interesting and fun and with a lot of different twists on the same core mechanism, I'm definitely interested in this.
A couple of little things I do want to say as well is that although Railroad Inc. is a good entry point into just this is that type of a roll and writing game, I would say that I found this a lot more inherently satisfying that game. Okay. It's both more satisfying and also I would say, Railroad Inc. often gets quite constrained and you very quickly sort of realize, you're not going to be able to do all the things you want to do. This has a gentler, cozier feel to it. It is quite family friendly. It's kind of just a lovely time is kind of the nicest, most succinct way I can describe it. Yeah, that is The Hobbit There and Back Again by Office Dog, the publisher, and Rhino Knizia. Okay, so before we move on to the rest of the episode, just a couple of things in the middle here, which is we have a Patreon. If you're not familiar, that is over at boardgamebarrage.com/Patreon or patreon.com/boardgamebarrage. And if you are not already listening to our bonus episodes, then let me tell you, there are twice as many episodes of the podcast as you might think exist. Every other week, we also do a bonus episode where we talk about other stuff that's going on in our life, whether that's the stuff we're watching, just general day-to-day. Mark has updates on his soccer league shenanigans. I'm talking about video games here and there.
Movie
just
reviews.
The other stuff that we're talking about that is, lots of movie and TV reviews. Yep. Basically the stuff that isn't primarily board game related, although we do have some board game talk there.
Sure.
That is out over at boardgamebarrage.com/Patreon if you're interested in those bonus episodes. There's also some special sort of bonus tiers for people in the Discord. So head on over there and we hugely appreciate if you would check that out. One other quick thing to talk about is we are in the middle of voting for our draft. So if you've listened to our draft episode, which was the previous episode, and you have not already voted, you can head on over to boardgamebarrage.com/draft to vote for the winner of who you think has the best selection. And if you do that, you could be eligible to win $100.
That's right.
$100.
Much to Kellen's protestations that it should be much higher, but we're capping it at 100.
Okay. Let's move on to the main topic, which is, what are we calling this, Mark?
I think, so this is a piggyback fairly directly to episode 41, again, which was recorded back in 2018, where we talked about the games that sort of made us the board gamers that we are. So those were formative games that sort of got us from childhood in board gaming, where we were just young pups who didn't understand what games were, and we progressed from tic-tac-toe and whatever to actually entering the board gaming hobby. So I like to think of this as we're now adolescents in the board game hobby, and we've sort of shed the puppy love, and now we're dating a little bit. Maybe we're actually going on our first dates. This is we're not necessarily, we haven't matured yet, but this is what sort of got us really going in the hobby once we sort of entered it.
Yeah, I like that. Kind of like a puppy love is almost like a good word for that.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of what's the top. I can't help but have Kellen in my head trying to think, trying to force episode titles on me before we even recorded the episode.
Kellen is definitely the devil on my shoulder trying to come up with sexualized terms for what we should call this episode. For sure. That's without a doubt. But yeah, okay, first dates, board gaming first dates.
Yeah, totally. I like that. So why don't you kick us off, Mark? Why don't you tell us the first game on your list that fits the bill here?
Yeah, so these games are games that, again, were influential to me as I was first getting into board games in a quote-unquote serious manner. So there's no really clear way for me to sort these in order. I wouldn't say there's ones are more influential than the others, and the chronology at this point has escaped me, so I'm not really sure when I played these games, but they all have special meaning and moments, and were special moments for me, again, in my evolution as a board gamer, for lack of a better term. So the first one I'm going to talk about is a game that when I was looking for a board game group, so this is now, I realize I'm interested in board games. I want to meet other people who are into board games. And I've not yet met Neelan and Kellen and Dean and the Great Indoors group, but I'm joining random meetups. I'm just trying to find any people who get into this hobby, know this hobby, and offer me a chance to play the games. So there was this meetup I went to fairly regularly. I think it's a couple times a month, but I didn't really know anybody there, and they had a lot of turnover in this meetup. And so you never really got a chance necessarily to form connections. At least I didn't. And maybe that's because I was sort of late into this group and whatever. But a game that was there that I found myself always enjoying, and it was a big party game and got a lot of people together to play, was a game called CS Files. Are you familiar with CS Files?
Interesting. No, I have not heard of this at all.
CS Files was a Taiwanese game that would be published the next year as Deception Murder in Hong Kong. So this was like a twofold interesting thing for me, where this game like allowed me to interact, because this is like Deception Murder in Hong Kong. This generally is better with more players, so it allowed me to play with a bunch of people at the same time and talk to people, because there's a lot of interaction in this game. So it sort of allowed me to be social with other people, but also was a game that I had never heard of. And not that I was like super knowledgeable at this point in my gaming career, but I had never heard of this. This is like a small Taiwanese game. And it was my first time, not that this happens very often, but like seeing a game that I played, I was thinking to myself, this game is fantastic. How come I've never heard of it? And then the next year, seeing it on Kickstarter and seeing a lot of buzz being generated for it. And again, it would later become a game that I enjoyed a great deal. I think it was in my top 50 at some point, but it's always been a game that I've enjoyed. And this also was a fundamental game in terms of my game trading career, because I played this game, CS Files, really liked it. Found out they were going to do another version of it, as the American version, Deception Murder Hong Kong. And there was buzz for it, but there wasn't like a crazy amount of buzz, if memory serves. I could be wrong, but if memory serves, I remember thinking this game is actually going to do much better than the sense I'm sort of getting, and people don't realize like how good this game is going to be. So this might have been my first or second foray into Kickstarters, and I bought myself a 5-pack of this game, thinking to myself, this game is going to be better than anybody thinks it's going to be. So I bought a pack of 5. And I think this is like very crass and very dumb of me, but like I still remember that I bought them for like on Kickstarter for like $20 each. They were like, that's what the cost was for buying a 5-pack. And I sold/traded them at a value of like $80 per game, because it was so hot when it first came out and people realized how good it was. And that was my first like really nailing it in the trading market. So that sort of fueled the monster I've since become. So CS Files / Deception Murder Hong Kong back in 2013-14 was a really big game for me in forming who I became.
That's great, because I feel like even for the group, Dean's group, where we kind of all met, I felt like Deception was such a formative game for all of us around that time as well. So like I have a lot of great memories of just playing that with you and Kellen and Christina. Yeah. So yeah, that absolutely tracks for me. And especially like I don't think I even realized like it was, I would never have guessed that you were playing it in like its prototypey right. form to some extent. That's cool. Yeah. So the first game on my list is, not to make this too much of like a throwback to like the previous episode that we were talking about, the one from 7 years ago, but like that ended off with me talking about Through the Ages and kind of like how formative that was for me in the first like few months relatively of my playing the modern hobby. So I was in such a big like Vlada Kvartal kick that like I was just like chasing down like all of these other games to play. And at that point I also hadn't played that many cooperative games. So, once I was invited to play Mage Knight as a sort of cooperative game, this kind of blew me away. This is for so many different reasons. Like incredible Vlada Kvartal game, a very heavy, not necessarily cooperative, but not necessarily competitive, like somewhere in between. Like some of the scenarios can be one, either or the other. You're not exactly co-oping, but you're not exactly competing either, like depending on how you choose to play it. Just a cool experience of just kind of you exploring this world together and interacting and kind of beating each other to the punch in certain things, but then collaborating it together at the end to like get a boss. I just love the idea of that. A neat sort of combination of stuff I'd played before. Like it is technically a kind of a deck building game, or it is really like you have a deck that you are building up, which is your combat deck, which you're getting increased power to by getting access to like characters throughout the board map. So it's a hybrid of stuff I've played before, and on top of that, it's very much an imagining of one of my favorite video games turned into a board game. As often something that Vlada Kvartal does, this is basically Heroes of Might and Magic turned into a board game. So it's just like ticking all of these boxes for me as like a early, heavy board game experience that kind of really resonated with me. And on top of that, it was one of the first, if not maybe the first solo game I sort of ever picked up sort of just to play. I wish I'd gotten into it more as a solo game. I think the thing I always find quite intimidating about it is that every time I play Mage Knight, you kind of need to relearn the rules a little bit because it's so complex. I never got into like a zone where I was just playing it sort of repeatedly over and over again. But absolutely adore Mage Knight. It's one that I sort of think about a lot, especially recently, as something like maybe there would be something in returning to that. I would love, I don't know, the digital version of this just to sort of kind of maybe ease my means of like getting back into it. But yeah.
Mage Knight is one that I have still yet to play, and now that I've sort of been more into playing solo games, is one that I find myself feeling like not obligated, because it's not like an obligation, but one that I feel like I gotta try just because of how passionate those fans of it are who have played it. And a lot of people are passionate on the same level you are, where it's like played it once, loved it, or played a couple times and loved it, and have just not been able to play it again. Not because they didn't like it, they loved it, but it can be hard to get back into. And it maybe even feels to me like the same way I like to play Mr. President, like set it up, learn the rules, play it, and then keep playing it, but not necessarily force myself to play it all at once, and just like step away from it, come back. And so play a couple times while I have the rules fresh in my head without feeling the need to like force it all in one sort of session, maybe.
I think that's probably the right way to do it. And I think in a world that I was kind of more, had been more inclined to do that, just like leave it set up, I probably would have sort of done it exactly that way, because that feels right. Because, you know, it is a very long game if you try to play it in one session, so it's not necessarily the ideal way to do it.
And that can be sort of daunting in terms of even wanting to get on the table when you think of like, oh, this is going to take me 4 hours, so when am I going to do this? But if you could break that up into a couple bites, then maybe it's better. So my next game, I think, works as a sort of piggybacking to your explanation of Mage Knight. This is a game that when we did our first ever top 50 games of all time, I think this is a game that got the most what and huzz from listeners. They didn't get why I had this so high. And I think this was like a top 10, if not top 5 game for me. But Francis Drake was a really big game for me early in my board gaming career, so to speak. And for some of the reasons that you mentioned, like this was a game that, again, I never heard of, but was an amalgamation of a lot of very cool mechanisms that I already liked and some that I had never heard of that became some of my favorites. So like the biggest thing for me with Francis Drake was this is a game that introduced me to time tracks, which has become like probably my favorite mechanism of any in board gaming. And for those who don't know what that is like, it's games that you have like a track or some sort of string of options, and usually the best options are farthest ahead, and you can go as far down this track as you want to get the great stuff right away. But if you do, you usually are like leaving your opponents with multiple turns before it gets back to your turn because you've chosen to jump as far ahead as you have. That was the first time I ever saw a time track, and I just instantly loved it, and became like a mechanism that if a game has it, I immediately am interested because I enjoyed it so much with Francis Drake. It also has other aspects I like bluffing, and this is all sort of wrapped in a game that was older. Like even when I played it, Francis Drake wasn't like anything hot at the time, but had such a lavish production. And I'd sort of gone into the hobby thinking I'm all about mechanisms. Like I don't really care about what the production is. Like I'm just looking for a good game, and I don't care if it's like no art or whatever, or just, you know, a string of numbers. If you give me a good game, I'll be happy. But Francis Drake was a game that showed me that, hey, you know, if you have a game that has little treasure chests and you put jewels in your treasure chests and it's got like this production value, like it can really enhance your experience. And so Francis Drake was this aha moment in a lot of ways for me.
That's cool. I'm sure I've mentioned this before. Like, I have one enduring memory of this, which is of you setting it up and then having to tear it down because we didn't get a chance to play it. I've still never played this.
Okay, yeah, we could do this definitely whenever we get back together, maybe Dice Tower West or something, because it's not like super hard to teach or whatever, and I think we'd all definitely have a good time. But that is a hilarious memory. We were at somebody's house for a game night, and I set it up, and the game is not like super cumbersome to set up, but I set it up.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of pieces.
You taught the whole thing as well.
Taught the whole thing.
Did you teach it as well?
I did teach the whole thing. I did teach the whole thing as well. And then just as we're about to start, someone's like, I don't think this is for me, or I don't think I should do this right now, and we decided to go something else. But that was a very funny memory.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I still really want to try this. This seems like so much like something I would love.
Yeah.
Okay, my second game is bouncing off of what was my love for the Resistance very early. Like, I think I've often mentioned about how, the Resistance was kind of like my, oh my god, I didn't realize board games could be like this, like just a purely social experience, not much of a board presence, that sort of thing. So I went down that rabbit hole very hard in the first year or two of the hobby, where I was just like trying to find every social deduction game I could find, and like sort of trying to see, have you played this one? Everyone in my group had played Shadows of Over Camelot, so like that was one that I was like, oh man, I felt like I missed the boat on that, but I kept trying to find like more and more stuff that kind of fit the bill. And the one that kind of like really stuck out to me early on was Two Rooms and a Boom, because it was kind of this sort of niche thing you kind of heard about, where people were kind of talking about this in the context of like these big group games, a convention game. How would something even work if you were playing with 20 people? At that point in time, there was no retail version of this. I believe it only existed in print and play. So it was the first print and play game I made, where I sort of bought it print and play, printed out the cards, stuffed them into sleeves, took it to a game night and was like, look at this mad thing, and showed everyone Two Rooms and a Boom in like a really big group and got us all playing it. And it just kind of felt like I was bringing something kind of really unique and special. And it was something that like kind of really resonated with me. It's something that still sticks with me in the light of stuff like Blood in the Clock Tower, where I really love these big social experiences. Now, a lot of people would make the argument that Two Rooms and a Boom kind of breaks down as a game, but I still think that there's very little that's quite like it in terms of just activating a large number of people in a shared space like that. I went on to play this every time I would go to like any convention. I would just try to find the people that were playing Two Rooms and a Boom, and I would just spend the whole night like playing it with them over and over, because it's just such a lovely social experience. Even if it just often boils down to like arbitrarily picking which room you're going to end up in at the end of the game, there's still such a fun journey and story and like social game along the way that just like I found really, really kind of still to some extent like there's nothing that's still quite like it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, games that can accommodate 20 people and actually want a number that high are obviously exceedingly rare. And whenever you find yourself in those places, if you can find a game that accommodates that, that's just going to make for a really unique and fun and silly experience. Even if the game is serious, like just the fact that you're trying to get 20 people to play the same game is inherently somewhat silly and a fun sort of thing to do. And you couple that with your experience of being the person who brought the game and having to print it out and cut it out. Like that is a very cool formative experience for sure as well.
Totally. I think that the other part of this as well is that, like, it is a game now that it has a retail copy, I still have that game. Like I probably haven't played Two Rooms and a Boom in probably like 5+ like since before COVID, or like some probably before the podcast was maybe the last time I played it, but I still have it because it still just feels like the game I want to find the right opportunity to just break out and be like, okay, let me show you guys this because it's going to blow your mind,
Yeah.
Like it's just that sort of thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
So getting back to early on in the hobby, and you're frenzied and you just want to play all the time, and I still haven't had my group. This is maybe I was a Dean's group by now, but maybe not going regularly yet. So I tried to, as most people, maybe not most, but many people in the hobby will do early in their board gaming adventure or their experience, try to get your non-gaming friends that you've established, throughout your life into games, right? That's something I think a lot of people do to their folly sometimes, but it's a natural sort of thing. And so at this time I was playing a ton of soccer. I was playing soccer 3 times a week or more. And so I had my soccer friends that were like firmly entrenched. I would see them all the time, obviously, and we would hang out socially. And so I tried to get them to play, board games. I tried introducing them to board games to varying degrees of success. Like, we all have this thing where we have non-gamer friends and we try to go with Twilight Imperium, and like it fails miserably, even though you think that they should get it, but you realize later that it's silly. But, so I would introduce them to games. Sometimes it would work, sometimes they wouldn't. But one game that really hit hard was Survive Escape from Atlantis. This was a game that I introduced to my soccer friends. And even though this is like definitely a board game, this is not a mass market. Well, maybe it was mass market at some point, but this is not a game with like super, super straightforward rules. Like there are some rules that you have to teach, but it is simple enough that all my friends got it. And I just have a very clear memory of them being maybe a little apprehensive at first, because like, what are all these pieces? You're making this board and there's all these tiles and all this stuff going on, and I'm teaching some rules. And so they started to dip their toe in it, pun not intended, into this game. And then as they're understanding how it works and as they're understanding how mean this game can be, because you can like send sea monsters to eat your opponent's pieces, and really them getting into it and like seeing their competitiveness from soccer, maybe, but maybe just their like, competitiveness as people or whatever, come out and threatening to send the sea monster to eat your opponent's people, and just really, really seeing them dive into it and enjoying it and having me enjoy it and them wanting to play it again and requesting it over and over again was just, again, like was one of the first, oh, okay, maybe the heavier stuff doesn't work for everyone. And, obviously we shouldn't shoehorn people into like trying things that they don't like, obviously. But there are times where you get the right game with playing with your family or friends who are not otherwise gamers, and they're like, oh, wait, I don't like the other ones, but this one I love. This one's great. And you have that really, really cool feeling. And also, another thing that this game sort of like opened my eyes to was, I played it and had fun and always brought this. And then I noticed like 10 games into it that it had it has like a little decal or sticker on the top of it that says 30th anniversary edition. So I had no idea this game was from like 1982 when I was playing it. And it sort of made me realize that just because a game is old doesn't mean that it is no longer fun, like it has been eclipsed. And this is like a lesson that I've taken in other aspects of my life, like the old things in culture. Sometimes the older stuff, older movie stuff, are still great. And this was one of the first times that I realized that, and that made me sort of shift my focus from like not always the cult of the new, not always the hottest games, but sometimes some of that old stuff is really great. And yeah, so Survive Escape from Atlantis.
I think this is similarly one of the, if we ignore the stuff that was just truly like in the old, like Monopolies and the Risk Scrabbles and that sort of thing. Like one of the older games that I've probably played the most of, like because it's just still so good. It has this weird thing where it's like it feels newer than it is.
Yes,
like
100%.
It still
100%.
kind of holds up exactly like you'd expect it to. Yeah, great. And there have been so many like good new editions of this. I know that there's one that's like just called, oh god, there was a new version of this that came out last year.
One, right? I know there's a space version.
Maybe.
I've never played,
but yeah, it's still being constantly remade. The next game that I'm going to be talking about is Grand Austria Hotel. This is probably sort of like one of the, I'm not going to say like first Euro games, but like first sort of like heavy, mechanically dense Euro games with like these very intricately interconnected systems that really spoke to me. There was obviously, there was stuff like Agricola and there were other Uwe games I was playing, but like for whatever reason, Grand Austria Hotel like really kind of just like stuck in my brain. Like something about the way it was complex, but like complex in kind of like all the right ways while still having coherent theme and feeling to it that just kind of like really worked for me. It was I think it has to be my first taste of the Italian designers. And this is kind of like the hallmark of all of their games. This kind of like layered, interconnected complexity that just kind of really, everything kind of meshes together in a way that is hard to wrap your brain around at first, but feels very rewarding as you pick away at it.
Yeah.
This is also a game that like for whatever reason, I haven't gone back to as much as I would have liked in recent years, I should say. Like, I was playing a lot of this kind of when it was first introduced to me. And for whatever reason, like, I'm sure it's still as good as it always was. I know it was on my top 50 for a little bit, but I haven't played this in a very long time, despite how much I used to love it.
Yeah, so was this, you had played this before Tzolk'in? Or was this right around the same time as Tzolk'in?
I think it was definitely before Tzolk'in. It was probably similar to what I was describing with like Mage Knight, where it was like, okay, I've liked these designers. Now I'm going to sort of seek out other stuff by them. And everyone was raving about Tzolk'in. And I can't remember even the context of like why. I think it was something like maybe that like Dean had played it but sort of hadn't loved it, so it kind of like sort of come through the group but never really stuck.
Yeah.
But like everyone kept talking about Tzolk'in because that had since gone on to be like my favorite game by the Italian designers. But like I think for whatever reason it was a while after playing Grand Austria Hotel that I eventually got around to trying Tzolk'in.
Yeah, I remember my first time playing Grand Austria and then like hearing about Tzolk'in, and they did Lorenzo, right? Lorenzo Magnifico?
Yes. I didn't end up playing Lorenzo until much later.
Yeah. But and I remember like seeing all these games that weren't the same, like much different, but had the same sort of feeling, and they all felt interesting and very soundly designed. And I remember that moment in my gaming past.
Totally. One of the other things I think that I also remember about this, and kind of as this starts like segue into the time that, like, you know, when we started to do the podcast, is like, I think I can't remember if this was like in the first year of the podcast or just before, but I remember when Coimbra was announced, and it was like, it was one of the hot anticipated games of the Gen Con of that year, and it was like, I told myself this is the one game I'm going to go pick up, and it was all based on like just me having now discovered and loved so many of their games, that it was just very kind of, I would say, so probably second and third to like Kvartal and Rosenberg as like designers that I was suddenly just paying attention to like everything they were doing.
Yeah. For my last game, I am now going to go into that game group that brought me together with Nealon and Kellen. I think I've talked about this game before, but this was early in my time with the game group that Nealon and Kellen were already part of, and that would sort of like be where this podcast was sort of birthed from. And so this was Dean's Game Nights, who's been brought up a bunch of times on this episode and throughout the history of the show. But this was a regular game night that had been happening for like 15 years before I even got there. And one thing that sort of happens at these game nights are, you know, people show up, they sort of split into tables, and usually you get like quite, you know, not always heavy games, but these are all like quote unquote serious gamers. So you get real meaty games being played often. And then a lot of times as the night winds down, we'll all sort of come together as people leave. We'll come together and we'll do like a Time's Up. This was where I first played Time's Up, and that was a huge influential moment. Playing Time's Up with these guys for the first time was huge. But the game I'm thinking of now was also in this sort of situation where we were winding down, and I still didn't really know everybody, but we played Dead Last. And I know that Kellen was there. I know Kellen was there. I know Nealon was there. I think Christina was even there. I think Christina was over there.
I think Christina might have been there. I'm trying to remember exactly.
I think so.
I do remember Kellen brought the game for sure.
Okay. I can remember exactly where I was sitting at the table. I can remember where Kellen was sitting. I remember where you were standing at the table. And so I don't even remember exactly the rules of this game, but basically it's a full negotiation game where everybody has, I think everybody has a color assigned to them, and everybody has cards of everybody else. So if I'm like purple, I would have Nealon's orange card and Kellen's red card and everybody else's color. And then it's a situation where all the game is you go around the table and you discuss who everybody should kill, and you sort of agree on it if you can or whatever. And then everybody puts one card out, and then the cards are flipped, and whoever has the most votes gets killed, and whoever's dead last, whoever doesn't get killed wins the game. But it's all about negotiating who should be killed and who should not be killed, and that's all it is. That's all it is. Yeah. It's sort of like, what's the game I'm thinking about? The long one that takes forever. Diplomacy. It's almost like diplomacy filtered to like a 30-minute experience or less.
It's like effectively just like Survivor, but like reduced just to an endless series of tribal councils. It is just like vote who's getting eliminated, vote who's getting eliminated, vote who's getting eliminated. That's kind of the whole game.
Yeah, I don't even know. I can't even remember like what they tell you to do, like what is allowed and what is not allowed. All I can remember is like you just beg and you just plot, and that's all there is. But there might be more to it, but I think that's basically what it comes down to.
I think that's it, really. But like, it's the sort of game where like it's the intent is that like all the stuff happens in the margins, right? It's like you say to your neighbors, like, no, we're going to get Mark, right? And then you subtly flash your card to like someone next to you, and you know, like you're doing like all this like underhanded stuff constantly, just trying to like manipulate people to vote the way you want them to vote.
Right. And so I remember we played this a couple times, but the first time I played with you guys, I remember that you, Nealon, were like, again, I didn't know you at the time, but you did come across very much as trying to connect people. You struck me as and I know later on you revealed yourself as like, people voted you in that group as like the person who, what was it called? The shadow or whatever?
Best shadow.
Best shadow, yeah. The person who's best at like hiding what their true intent was. But like in that moment, I don't know if you were just playing it straight or what, but I remember you trying to connect people together, and you were very like collaborative, and I just remember coming to you and feeling, okay, this guy's trying to make it happen, trying to work, like I can try. And I remember Kellen also coming across as very social and talking to me and like, hey, you know, you're new to the group here, let's do this, let's do that. And I will never forget, I mean, it wasn't like end game, it wasn't like toward the end, but it was like midway, like I'd survived a couple cuts and things were very like on a knife's edge. And I talked to you, and I was talking to Kellen, and Kellen's like, hey, let's go with whoever. I can't remember who it was, Dan or something. Like, you know, let's go. We'll go with Green. And I remember knowing that I was also close to the chopping block. And I remember Kellen saying like, no, okay, we'll do this. You and I we're gonna get Dan, and I already got Nealon on it, and we're gonna do this. And everybody had their cards down. I picked Dan and flipped, and Kellen picked me. And he had arranged it so there were enough votes that I was the guy eliminated. And I don't remember his exact words, but what they amounted to was, welcome to the club. Like, this is your initiation. He said something like that, like, now you're a part of the group or something like that. Like, the fact that you've now been backstabbed is now your initiation into this group. And I remember two emotions at the moment. Like, one, well, actually three things. One, that was great. Like, that whole experience was great. Two, I felt really accepted. Like, in a way that, games that have edges and can be a little rough, if you do it with people that you trust or feel like you can get trust, it can change the dynamic of your friendship. Like, you can be like, oh, we can be mean to each other and it can be totally fine because we'll be friends a minute later. And three, all that aside, I'm gunning for this guy from now on. And definitely for the next couple of months. And Kellen knows this. I already told him this. Like, for the next couple of months, if I had a choice in a game, I was trying to take Kellen down. My first goal would be to win. My second goal would be to take Kellen down. And so, yeah, just very formative in getting to know you guys and just feeling like I was part of that group. And so that was dead last.
On a kind of, not exactly similar, but the specific note that this game hits for me is like very bridging the gap between like the games I was playing before the podcast and the games we started playing like when we started the podcast. Now, I think kind of like in the spirit of what you're talking about, Mark, especially with Kellen and Christina, we always tended to gravitate towards fighty area control games. And very early in the life of the podcast, enough that like this was probably the hot game that was coming out as the first episode of the podcast was like being recorded, basically, was Rising Sun. Enough so that the very third episode of the podcast is entirely devoted to Rising Sun, which is not something that we even do anymore. This kind of just struck me as kind of like the big, exciting Kickstarter game. It was a game that Kellen and I kind of bonded over in the early-ish days of Kickstarter because we kind of were both backing it and we were both excited for it. And it was Eric Lang's follow-up to Blood Rage, which we had both played a lot of times prior to that. And I think that sort of like combination of just how like raucous our games of this were in that group and kind of like how closely it ties to like my memories of like the earliest days of the podcast, to me is the perfect encapsulation of the sorts of experiences that was the later version of the experiences that kind of led to us like all being close as a friend group. These sort of the very arguey, very fighty, there's a heavy dose of just kind of doing something, saying something to someone, then backstabbing them, Kellen getting mad at everyone for reasons that feel completely unfair because he would have done exactly the same thing if he had thought of it first. It was all of that, like in a perfect encapsulation in one board game.
So, is episode 3 the episode that I'm thinking about? Is it the episode?
I mean, episode 3, if I'm not mistaken, I think episode 3 is just a Rising Sun focused episode, but I'm not sure. Am I misremembering something?
No, you might be. But do you remember the big?
No. What's the thing?
Oh my God! You don't remember me giving Christina all my coins?
Oh yeah. That's that's the one. I think that's got to be the episode where you spoke about it.
I would look.
100%.
I'm not going to tell listeners to go through an entire back catalog or whatever, but like. That was a huge moment in our podcast, like in our friend group and everything. But like, if you have the inclination to go back and listen to an episode and you haven't listened to that episode about Rising Sun and specifically what happened in that game, and you want to hear me and Kellen on the mic, on the podcast, get a little testy, like a little legitimately testy about each other or to each other, I would say listen to episode 3 for sure. But yes, this game was massive. I still remember the hype. I still remember you and Kellen talking about it coming out on Kickstarter and how excited you were. I still remember how much of an event it felt like when we were going to finally play it. It's sort of like akin to, and I'm sure other people have felt this when a hot board game comes out, but I remember like knowing the day that we were going to play it, and it felt like when like a huge movie comes out and it's like, you have it circled on your calendar a month beforehand. I'm like, okay, this is the day we're going to do it. And I still can remember how the table looked, where I sat. I was I sat at the edge of the table. Christina was to my right. You were to my left. Kellen was across the table from me. I remember so much about this experience viscerally. It was such a huge moment.
Perfectly pictured. I can't remember much else about their first LA apartment, but just like picturing like that space playing Rising Sun in particular. Yeah,
100%. Yeah, this is great. That's a great call.
Yeah. It's one that I sort of think about a lot because, like, you know, again, I still have it, and I think other games have kind of supplanted it for me, but like, man, it's still something.
If we could ever get back to it
for me.
If we could ever crack that open and get back to that magic, what if, Could happen. What if? Could happen. It had that magic years ago. It could have it still,
It could happen again. Exactly. Yeah. Maybe that's all we've been missing to like revive the magic. We don't need to revive the magic.
That's true. The magic's still there.
That is going to be it, though, for our journey through the games that I keep wanting to say the games that we once loved, but that was a different beta version of this topic. But like games that sort of like...
This is like young love. This is like, look, you and I are mature men now, We're mature men. We have but there were times when we were like young and we were new in the hobby and we were feeling all these feelings we never felt before. So this is this is the same sort of thing. It feels very analogous to me, at least.
Totally. I think the way that we've described these as well, I think is kind of like hit that note for sure for me.
Yeah.
Just kind of these really like kind of very core formative memories for me.
Absolutely.
That is going to do it for this episode. Thank you all so much for listening. Thank you, as always, to Heart Society for our intro and outro music, What's in Your Mind, Kid? If you want to talk to us more, you can find us on all of our social media, whether that is on Blue Sky, whether that is on Facebook, elsewhere. Otherwise, if you want to go to Discord, we are at boardgamebarrage.com/Discord, and we hang out there. We chat to people all the time. So if you're not in there, get in there.
Maybe if you've never gone to Discord and you want to give it a shot, what I would love for people to go to the podcast channel and just share a story, share like
absolutely
formative. I would love to read a couple like formative experiences, maybe games that, again, when's the last time I even thought of Dead Last? Like, it's been forever, but that was such a formative experience. I'd love to read a couple stories people feel like they'd like to share. So yeah,
that would be great. And I can also imagine that for a lot of people that Discord is quite intimidating when you first get there. It moves very quickly, but that's a good entry point. If you just want to come in, tell us about a memory or experience, a story you had from like your early days in the hobby, would love to hear it.
Would love to
read that. That's going to do it, though. Thank you all for listening. Goodbye.
Goodbye.